You ever trust a story so completely that when it finally cracks, you don't even recognize the town you live in? I do. I trusted it for 19 months. 19 months where everybody in Powell, Wyoming walked past the memorial bench outside the fire station and said a quiet little prayer for a dead man who never should have been inside that building. My name is Nolan Johnston. I'm 38 years old, and I'm a plumber. Not the kind of detail that usually matters in a story, but in this one, it's the thing that tore the whole town apart. Garrett Holbrook was my neighbor. 34, taught shop class at the high school, coached Little League on Saturdays, volunteered with the fire department since he was 21. He died on October 9, 2021, in a fire at the Powell Municipal Services building on Deaver Avenue. The official cause was structural collapse during a rescue operation. They said he went in to save a maintenance worker trapped on the second floor. They said the sprinkler system failed due to age. They said he died a hero. He was murdered. And the man who killed him, the man who shook Garrett's widow's hand at the funeral and stood at that podium with tears in his eyes calling Garrett the best of us, was the mayor of Powell, Wyoming, Roland Pruitt, the same man who right now is sitting in a cell at the Park County Detention Center waiting for his sentencing hearing. And I know all of this because I was the one who serviced the sprinkler system in that building 14 days before the fire. I signed the inspection log. I checked every valve. That system didn't fail. Somebody shut it off. Now, before I take you through everything, hit that subscribe button right now, because what I haven't told you yet is how I found the inspection records I thought I'd thrown away. What Garrett discovered about $341,000 missing from the town's emergency services fund, and what the mayor's own brother-in-law did to the fire marshal's report. If you think you know where this goes, I promise you, you don't. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight and what time it is where you are. I want to know who's hearing this. Let me take you back to September 2021, the last time everything in Powell still made sense. Powell's a town of about 7,000 people in the northwest corner of Wyoming, maybe 25 miles from the Montana border. The kind of place where you wave at every truck that passes because you probably know who's driving it. I grew up in Billings but moved to Powell in 2013 when my uncle offered me a job at his plumbing supply company. By 2021, I'd been running my own operation for 3 years, commercial and residential, mostly municipal contracts. Schools, public buildings, the rec center. That was my bread and butter. Garrett lived 2 doors down on South Bent Street. I'd known him since I moved in. He was one of those guys who was always doing something for somebody. You'd come home, and he'd be on your neighbor's roof patching a shingle because he noticed it while mowing his own lawn. His daughter, she was 6 at the time, she used to ride her bike up and down the sidewalk while Garrett sat on his porch grading shop class projects. That's the picture I keep in my head. That's the version of normal I'm talking about. His wife, Deb, worked at the elementary school as a reading specialist. Quiet, steady. The kind of person who held everything together without making a scene about it. They were good people. Not complicated good, just good. Mayor Pruitt had been in office since 2017, ran on a Rebuild Powell platform after the county budget cuts. Everybody loved him. He got the Deaver Avenue building renovated, pushed through a new ambulance purchase, expanded the volunteer firefighter program. He wore flannel and drove a Chevy and shook your hand at the hardware store. The kind of guy people called one of us. I didn't have a strong opinion about him either way. He was the mayor. He seemed decent. That was enough. I remember the night of October 9th because I was eating leftover chili at my kitchen table when the sirens started. 2 engines, which was unusual for Powell. I stepped outside and could see the glow from about 6 blocks east. By morning, I knew it was the municipal building. By noon, I knew Garrett was dead. The funeral was on a Thursday, October 14th. Half the town showed up. They held it at Christ Episcopal Church because it was the only building big enough. Mayor Pruitt gave the eulogy. I was sitting in the 4th row, and I watched him stand up there with his hand on the podium and his voice cracking and say, "Garrett Holbrook ran into that building because that's who he was. He didn't think about himself. He thought about the person who needed help." People cried. I cried. Deb sat in the front row, holding her daughter's hand, and she didn't make a sound the entire time, but her shoulders shook so hard the woman next to her put an arm around her. They put up the memorial bench 2 weeks later. Bronze plaque. Garrett Holbrook. He ran toward the fire. The town raised $11,000 in 9 days to pay for it. And then life moved on the way it does in small towns. Not because people forgot, because what else do you do? I went back to work. Municipal contracts, residential jobs, the usual. Late November, maybe early December, I got a call from the town manager's office asking me to bid on the plumbing work for the new municipal building they were planning to replace the one that burned. I said sure. I put the bid together, submitted it, and waited. 2 weeks later, the contract went to a company out of Cody, a firm I'd never heard of called Bridger Basin Mechanical. I called the town manager's office and asked what happened. The woman who answered, I don't even remember her name, honestly, she said something about competitive pricing and left it at that. I was annoyed, but I didn't think much of it. Contracts go sideways sometimes. That's business. But then, in January, I lost the rec center maintenance contract I'd held for 2 years. Same thing, went to an outside company, no explanation. And in February, the school district told me they were going in a different direction for their annual plumbing inspections. 3 contracts in 3 months. All of them municipal. All of them gone. I remember sitting in my truck outside the supply house on 1st Street thinking, something's off here. I wasn't late on anything. My work was clean. My bids were competitive. But every public contract I touched was evaporating. That's when I started paying closer attention. Not to the contracts, to the fire. I don't know exactly what triggered it. Maybe it was losing the work and having more time to think. Maybe it was driving past the empty lot on Deaver Avenue where the building used to be and noticing they'd already cleared the debris. That felt fast. 12 weeks and the whole site was scraped clean. I started with a simple question I couldn't shake. On September 25, 2021, I had gone to the municipal building for a routine inspection of the fire suppression system. 2nd floor, zones 3 and 4. I checked every valve, tested the pressure, signed the log. The system was fully operational. 14 days later, the official report said the sprinkler system failed due to age and deterioration. That doesn't happen. Not in 14 days. Not to a system I personally inspected and cleared. I tried to get the fire investigation report from the county, filed a public records request in March 2022. The clerk at the Park County office told me it would take 30 to 45 days. 62 days later, I got a 6-page summary. Not the full report, not the inspection data, not the witness statements. A summary. And the summary said the sprinkler failure was consistent with aging infrastructure and deferred maintenance. I read that sentence 3 times. Deferred maintenance. On a system I had personally inspected and documented as functional less than 2 weeks before the fire. I went to the fire station to talk to the chief. He wasn't available. I left a message. I left 2 more over the next week. He never called back. So I did the thing you do when you're a plumber and you need to figure out what went wrong. I went looking for my paperwork. I keep copies of every inspection I do. It's not fancy, just a carbon copy form I fill out on site with the date, the building, the system zones, the pressure readings, and my signature. I figured I'd pull my September 25th copy and compare it against the county's report, but I couldn't find it. I went through my filing cabinet, my truck, my office at the supply house. Nothing. I always kept my copies in the same drawer. They weren't there. Now, I want to be honest with you. For about a week, I thought maybe I just lost it. I'm not the most organized guy in the world. My wife left 2 years before this, and after the divorce, I'll admit things got a little scattered around the house. So I thought, okay, maybe it's in a box somewhere. But the thing that kept eating at me was this. My copies were gone. And the county's report didn't include any of my original inspection data. Not my name, not my readings, not the date of my visit. It was like I'd never been in that building. That's the first time I felt it. This cold, quiet feeling in my stomach that said, somebody doesn't want this to add up. I decided to go talk to Deb Holbrook. I hadn't been over there since the week after the funeral when I dropped off a casserole like everybody else did. I felt bad about that, honestly. Garrett was my neighbor for 8 years, and I basically disappeared after he died. Deb answered the door looking tired. She invited me in, and we sat at her kitchen table and she made coffee. I told her I'd been having trouble with my inspection records and that I was confused about the fire report. I didn't accuse anyone of anything. I just told her what I'd found, or hadn't found. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Garrett told me something about 2 weeks before the fire. He said he found something wrong with the numbers." I asked her what numbers. She said, "The emergency fund, the one Mayor Pruitt managed. Garrett was doing inventory on the station equipment and the purchase orders didn't match what they actually had. He said there was a gap, a big one." I asked how big. She said, "He didn't give me an exact number, but he said it was enough that somebody should be asking questions." I drove home from Deb's house that night, and I sat in my driveway for probably 20 minutes with the engine running. I was thinking about Garrett sitting on his porch grading papers while his daughter rode her bike. I was thinking about him finding those numbers. I was thinking about a sprinkler system that was working perfectly on September 25th and supposedly failed on October 9th. And I was thinking about how every municipal contract I had was gone. I need to stop for a second here. Have you ever realized that something terrible wasn't an accident, that it was done on purpose? And in that same moment you understood that the people around you already knew. That sinking feeling where the ground shifts and you're not sure who's standing on solid floor and who's standing on the trap door. If you've been there, tell me about it in the comments, because that's exactly where I was. What I didn't know yet was that Garrett's discovery was just the beginning. And what happened next at the county records office would make me realize I wasn't just chasing a hunch. I was stepping into something that a lot of people in Powell had worked very hard to keep buried. The next morning I drove to the Park County Courthouse in Cody. Took me about 45 minutes on Highway 14A. I went straight to the county clerk's office and asked for the complete fire investigation file. Not the summary, the full report with appendices, witness statements, and original inspection data. The woman at the counter, middle-aged, reading glasses on a chain, she typed something into her computer and then looked at me and said, "That file is currently under administrative review and not available for public access." I said, "Since when?" She said she didn't know. She just knew what the screen said. I asked who put it under review. She said she couldn't share that information. I stood there for a second. I said, "Okay, then I'd like the Emergency Services Fund expenditure reports for 2019 through 2021. Those should be public." She typed again, waited, and said, "Those are also flagged." I said, "You're telling me the town's public financial records are not available to the public?" She took off her glasses and looked at me and said, "Mr. Johnston, I'm just telling you what the system shows. If you have concerns, I'd suggest contacting the town administrator." I walked out of that building and I was angry. Not confused anymore. Angry. When I got back to Powell, I went to my garage. I had boxes from the divorce in there, stuff I'd just shoved in and never sorted. I spent 3 hours going through them. Old tax returns, old work orders, receipts, manuals. And in the bottom of the third box, inside a folder labeled 2021 Q3 Municipal, I found it. My inspection copy from September 25th, 2021. Handwritten. Powell Municipal Services Building, Deaver Avenue, Zones 3 and 4. Pressure readings normal. All valves operational. System clearance approved. My signature at the bottom. My hands weren't even shaking. They were steady. Dead steady. That scared me more than anything. I made 3 copies of that inspection form. Put one in a safe deposit box at First Federal in Cody. Put one in an envelope at my uncle's house. Kept one with me. Then I started doing the kind of work I never expected to be doing, digging into public records from other angles. I couldn't get the fire file or the emergency fund reports from the county, so I went around them. I pulled town council meeting minutes from the Powell Library. They keep hard copies going back to 2005. I found the original resolution authorizing the Emergency Services Fund in 2018. The fund was seeded with $420,000 from a federal FEMA preparedness grant. Mayor Pruitt was named as the fund's sole administrator. Sole administrator. No oversight committee. No secondary signatory. Just him. I went through every council meeting from 2018 to 2021 looking for references to the fund. In 3 years, I found exactly 4 mentions. 3 were Pruitt reporting that the fund was on track and well managed. The 4th was a brief note from September 2021. 1 month before the fire, where a council member named Beth Kearney asked for a formal audit. Pruitt responded that an audit was unnecessary given the fund's limited scope, and the motion was tabled. 1 month before Garrett found the discrepancies. 1 month before the fire. I wasn't a detective. I wasn't a journalist. I was a plumber with a carbon copy form and a bad feeling that was getting worse by the day. But the timeline was screaming at me. That's when Mayor Pruitt showed up at my door. It was a Saturday in May, late morning. I was in my garage when I heard a knock. I came around front and there he was. Khakis, a Powell Pioneers polo shirt, the smile. He said he heard I'd been spending time at the courthouse and he wanted to check in. "Make sure you're doing okay." I said I was fine. He said, "I know losing those contracts must have been frustrating. I want you to know that wasn't personal. The town's just trying to diversify its vendor base." I said, "Okay." He put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "Nolan, I've seen this before. A man loses a friend and he starts looking for somebody to blame. It's natural, but I'd hate to see you go down a road that ends up hurting you more than it helps." I looked at him, right in the eyes, and he looked right back at me, steady, warm, concerned. He said, "Grief makes people see things that aren't there, Nolan. I don't want that for you." I almost believed him. I mean, standing there on my porch, the guy was convincing. He had that thing where he made you feel like he was the one looking out for you. I actually felt a flicker of doubt, like maybe I was the crazy one. Then I remembered the inspection form in my safe deposit box, the one with my handwriting and normal pressure readings from a system that supposedly failed 14 days later. I told him I appreciated his concern and I'd keep his advice in mind. He patted my shoulder and left. I watched his truck pull away and I thought, he came here to see how much I knew, and now he thinks I don't know enough to be a problem. He was wrong. The next 3 months I kept my head down and I kept digging, quietly. I wasn't talking to anyone in town about what I was doing, not even my uncle, not even Deb, not yet. I didn't want to put her in a position before I had something solid beyond my inspection form and a suspicious timeline. I found the name of the fire marshal who wrote the official report, Lyle Gunderson, worked out of the county office in Cody. I looked him up. He'd been the county fire marshal for 11 years. Clean record, well respected. But I also found that his wife's maiden name was Pruitt. She was Roland Pruitt's sister. The fire marshal who ruled the sprinkler failure as aging infrastructure was the mayor's brother-in-law. I sat with that for a day. I genuinely didn't know what to do with it. I mean, I'm a plumber. I fix pipes, I don't unravel cover-ups. But here I was, staring at a family connection between the man who ran the town and the man who signed off on the fire that killed my neighbor. I need to be straight with you. For about a week, I considered letting it go. Seriously. I had no contracts, no allies, and the guy I was looking at had the town, the county, and apparently the fire marshal's office on his side. What was I going to do? Walk into City Hall with a plumbing inspection form and accuse the mayor of murder? But then I'd think about Garrett's daughter standing at that memorial bench, and I'd think about the $341,000 Deb told me about, and I'd think about that sprinkler valve that I personally opened and tested. You know what really pushed me past the point of no return? I want to pause here and ask you something. If you were standing where I was, you've got a piece of evidence in a safe deposit box, you know the fire report was written by the mayor's relative, and you know that a man who discovered missing money died in a building where the fire suppression was disabled. Do you go to the state police? Do you go to the press? Or do you shut up and protect your livelihood? Tell me in the comments what you'd do, because I'll tell you, there's no clean answer. Every option costs something. What Mayor Pruitt said to Deb Holbrook the following week made my decision for me. I went looking for Bridger Basin Mechanical, the company that got my municipal building contract. I searched the Wyoming Secretary of State's business registry. I found the filing. Bridger Basin Mechanical LLC was incorporated on November 12, 2021, 5 weeks after the fire. Its registered agent was a man named Terrence Pruitt, the mayor's cousin. The company that replaced me on the biggest contract in Powell was owned by the mayor's family. It had existed for 5 weeks when it won a municipal bid. I printed the filing. I added it to my folder. And then Deb called me. She was crying. She said the mayor had come to her house. He told her he was putting together a Garrett Holbrook Memorial Scholarship and wanted her blessing. She said that was fine, that was kind. But then he said something else. He said, "Deb, I've heard that Nolan Johnston has been asking some questions around town. I want to make sure nobody's filling your head with ideas that would dishonor Garrett's memory. He died a hero. Let's keep it that way." She said he smiled when he said it. Let's keep it that way. Like Garrett's death was a story he owned. Like the truth was his to manage. That was the end of my hesitation. I started building a real case. Not just my inspection form and some downloaded filings. I mean a documented, organized case. I drove to Cheyenne to meet with an attorney. Not a local one. I went to a woman at Wyoming Legal Aid who specialized in government accountability. I paid $350 for a 2-hour consultation, and I laid everything out. She listened, took notes, and told me 3 things. First, my inspection document was strong physical evidence that contradicted the official fire report. Second, the family connection between the mayor and the fire marshal was a clear conflict of interest that should have triggered an independent review. Third, the blocked public records requests were potentially illegal under Wyoming's Public Records Act. She said I needed to file a formal complaint with the Wyoming Division of Criminal Investigation, and she said I should do it soon, because the longer this sat, the harder it would be to recover records that might have been altered or destroyed. I filed the complaint on August 14, 2022. 43 pages. My inspection form, the county summary, the business filing for Bridger Basin Mechanical, the council minutes about the audit request, the family connection documentation, and a timeline I'd built showing every relevant date from September 2021 through July 2022. And then I waited. The DCI agent who was assigned to my case, I'll just call him the agent, I never got permission to use his name publicly, he contacted me in September. He was thorough, careful, and he didn't give me any false hope. He said the complaint had enough substance to warrant an investigation, but that these things moved slowly. He said I should keep living my life and not discuss the case publicly. So I did, or I tried to. But Powell is a town of 7,000 people. Word travels. By October, people knew I'd filed something. I don't know who leaked it, maybe someone at the county clerk's office, maybe someone at DCI, I don't know. But suddenly the way people looked at me changed. Not everyone, but enough. The woman who ran the coffee shop on Coulter Avenue, she'd always been friendly, always asked about my work. She stopped making eye contact. The guy who ran the auto parts store started keeping conversations short. Little things. The kind of things you notice when you've lived somewhere for 9 years and you know what normal feels like. And then, in late October, almost exactly a year after the fire, Mayor Pruitt gave an interview to the Powell Tribune. The article was about the 1-year anniversary of Garrett's death and the upcoming scholarship ceremony. Pruitt talked about Garrett's bravery, the community's resilience, all the usual stuff. But near the end of the interview, he said this: "There are always a few people in any community who'd rather tear things down than build them up. People who turn tragedy into conspiracy because it makes them feel important. I feel sorry for them. I really do." He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. Everybody in Powell knew who he was talking about. The truth about people who cover things up is that they need you to stop before you find the next piece. They're not afraid of what you already have. They're afraid of what you haven't found yet. November and December were hard. The DCI investigation was ongoing, but I had no updates. The social freeze in town was getting worse. My uncle pulled me aside at Thanksgiving and told me, gently, because he's a good man, that a few of his customers had asked if I was the one causing trouble, and whether the supply house was associated with my claims. I told him I was sorry. He said he didn't need an apology. He just wanted me to know what I was dealing with. Christmas was quiet. I ate dinner at my uncle's with his family, and nobody mentioned the fire or the mayor or any of it. I appreciated that. In January 2023, 2 things happened. First, the DCI agent called me and said they'd obtained a warrant for the original fire investigation file, the complete one, not the summary. He said the file included data I hadn't seen and that it was significant. He wouldn't tell me more. Second, the town of Powell sent me a notice that my business license was under review due to outstanding compliance questions. I called the town administrator's office. The woman who answered said she couldn't provide specifics, but that I should expect a formal letter within 30 days. I actually laughed. I mean, what else do you even do at that point? Hit that like button and subscribe right now if you're still with me, because what I haven't told you yet is what was in that original fire file. In February, the DCI agent asked me to come to the field office in Casper, 3-hour drive. I went the same day he called. He sat me down in a conference room and put a folder on the table. He said, "I'm going to show you something and then I'm going to ask you to identify it." He opened the folder. Inside was a photocopy of a fire suppression system inspection form, handwritten, dated September 25, 2021. Powell Municipal Services Building, Deaver Avenue. But it wasn't my form. Same building, same date, same zones, but different handwriting, different readings. And where my form showed normal pressure and full system clearance, this one showed substandard pressure readings and recommended deferred maintenance pending budget approval. Someone had created a fake version of my inspection, a version that made the sprinkler failure look predictable, a version that erased the fact that the system was working perfectly. The agent asked me if I recognized the handwriting. I didn't. He asked if I'd ever filled out a form with those readings. I said no. I showed him my copy, the one from my safe deposit box, with my actual handwriting and actual readings. He put both forms side by side on the table and said, "Mr. Johnston, we believe the version in the county's file was fabricated. We also believe we know who fabricated it." He told me the handwriting matched samples from Lyle Gunderson's office files, the fire marshal, the mayor's brother-in-law, the man who signed off on the fire report. He'd forged my inspection form. I didn't say anything for a while. I just sat there looking at those two pieces of paper, one real, one fake. And I thought about all those months where people looked at me like I was the problem. The DCI investigation accelerated after that. They brought in a forensic accountant to audit the Emergency Services Fund. Within 6 weeks, they had a complete picture. $341,000 had been diverted from the fund between 2019 and 2021. The money went to 3 shell companies, all registered to members of Pruitt's extended family. Bridger Basin Mechanical was one of them. The other 2 were a consulting firm and a landscaping company that had never mowed a single lawn. Garrett Holbrook had stumbled onto the financial discrepancies during a routine equipment inventory in late September 2021. He'd noticed that purchase orders for $78,000 in firefighting equipment had been approved and paid, but the equipment didn't exist. He asked questions. He told Deb, and within 2 weeks, he was dead. The fire at the municipal building was set to destroy the financial records stored in the second-floor office. The sprinkler system was manually disabled. Valve wheel turned to the off position, which I could have told anyone if they'd asked me, because I was the last person to verify it was on. Garrett wasn't performing a rescue. There was no trapped maintenance worker. He was in the building after hours because he'd gone back to photograph the purchase orders. He didn't know the fire was coming. The DCI presented their findings to the Park County District Attorney in April 2023. But the DA, and I want to be careful here because this part gets complicated, the DA had a working relationship with Pruitt's office going back years. Joint press conferences, shared anti-drug initiatives, the usual small county overlap. So the DCI went over his head. They contacted the Wyoming Attorney General's office directly. On May 7, 2023, the Attorney General convened a special session of the Park County Grand Jury. I was told to be available to testify. I said I would be. The hearing was held at the Park County Courthouse in Cody. The gallery was full. People from Powell, people from Cody, reporters from Casper, and even one from Denver. I recognized faces from town. Some of them looked angry. I couldn't tell if they were angry at me or at what they were about to hear. I was called to testify at 11:15 in the morning. I brought my original inspection form, the real one, with my handwriting. I brought the business filing for Bridger Basin Mechanical. I brought the council minutes showing the tabled audit. But the thing that mattered most was simpler than any of that. The special prosecutor asked me to describe, in my professional opinion, what it would take to disable the fire suppression system in the Powell Municipal Services building. I said you'd have to physically turn the main valve to the closed position. It's a 6-inch gate valve. It requires deliberate manual rotation. It doesn't fail. It doesn't stick. It doesn't close by accident. Someone turned it off. She asked how I could be certain the system was functional on September 25th. I said because I was there. I tested it. I signed the form. And the form in the county's file with different readings was not written by me. The courtroom was quiet. Then she showed the grand jury Lyle Gunderson's forged inspection form next to mine, side by side on a screen. Same building, same date, two completely different documents. My handwriting versus his. My normal readings versus his fabricated ones. I looked at the gallery. I could see Deb Holbrook in the third row. She was holding a tissue, but she wasn't crying. She was just watching. Steady. Mayor Pruitt was sitting with his attorney in the front. When the two forms went up on screen, he leaned over and whispered something to his lawyer. His face didn't change much, but his hands were flat on the table, and his fingers were pressing down so hard his knuckles went white. The special prosecutor said, "Mr. Johnston, in the 19 months between the fire and your DCI complaint, did anyone from the town of Powell, the county, or the fire marshal's office ever contact you to obtain your original inspection records?" I said, "No, ma'am. Nobody asked. Nobody called. In fact, when I tried to get the fire investigation file through a public records request, I was given a 6-page summary with none of my inspection data included." She said, "And when you visited the county clerk's office to request the full file and the emergency fund expenditure reports?" I said, "Both were flagged as unavailable. Administrative review." She turned to the grand jury and said, "The state will demonstrate that these records were restricted on November 3, 2021, 25 days after the fire, by direct request of the Powell Town Administrator's Office, at the instruction of Mayor Roland Pruitt." Roland Pruitt's attorney objected. The judge overruled. And then the forensic accountant testified. $341,000. 3 shell companies. Purchase orders for equipment that was never delivered. Payments to family members' businesses for services never rendered. The grand jury returned indictments on all counts: arson, second-degree murder, embezzlement, obstruction, evidence tampering, conspiracy. Lyle Gunderson was indicted separately for forgery, obstruction, and official misconduct. When the indictments were read, I watched Pruitt's face. He didn't collapse. He didn't shout. He just sat there. And for half a second, maybe less, I saw something in his expression that looked like exhaustion. Not guilt, not fear, just the look of a man who'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and finally put it down. Then it was gone, and his face went blank. Things moved fast after the grand jury. The arrest happened on the courthouse steps. Pruitt was taken into custody by DCI agents. The Tribune photographer got the picture. Pruitt in handcuffs with the courthouse behind him. That photo ran in every Wyoming paper, and 2 national outlets picked it up. Lyle Gunderson turned himself in the following day. His attorney released a statement saying he was cooperating fully, and that he'd acted under duress. I don't know how true that is. I know he forged my inspection form and signed a fire report that helped cover up a murder. That's what I know. The town council held an emergency session on May 11th. They voted 6-1 to remove Pruitt from office and appoint an interim mayor. The one dissenting vote was Beth Carney, not because she supported Pruitt, but because she said removing him by vote wasn't enough. She wanted a formal censure on the record. They added it. Beth Carney, the same council member who'd asked for an audit in September 2021 and been shut down. She stood up in that meeting and said, "I asked for this 2 years ago. This council told me it wasn't necessary. I want that on the record too." Nobody argued with her. Over the next few weeks, things I never expected started happening. The state launched a full audit of every fund Pruitt administered. The fire marshal's office was placed under independent review. 3 town employees who had processed the shell company payments were put on administrative leave, and people in Powell started talking. Cora Niemeyer was the first. She was the town clerk, had been for 17 years. She came to my house on a Tuesday evening, maybe 2 weeks after the indictments. She stood on my porch and she said, "I knew the numbers were wrong, Nolan. I saw the invoices in 2020. I knew Bridger Basin wasn't a real company. But Roland told me it was a temporary arrangement and that the money would be returned. And I believed him because I'd worked with him for 6 years, and I trusted him." She was shaking. I let her talk. She said, "When Garrett died, I told myself it was a coincidence, that the fire had nothing to do with the money. I told myself that for a year and a half, and every Sunday I sat in church, and I felt sick. I didn't know what to say to her. I still don't, honestly. Part of me was angry. She knew. She could have said something. If she'd spoken up in 2020, maybe Garrett would still be alive. But another part of me understood it. Because I live in Powell, too. I know what it feels like when the person you'd report to is the person doing the damage. Where do you go? Who do you trust? Especially when you've got a job and a mortgage and a life built around the assumption that the people in charge are basically decent. I told Cora I appreciated her coming to tell me. I didn't say it was okay, because it wasn't. But I thanked her for showing up. She wasn't the only one. Over the following weeks, I heard from 4 other people in town who said they'd had suspicions, but hadn't known what to do. The guy who ran the hardware store told me he'd noticed Pruitt's cousin's truck at the municipal building late at night a few times in 2021, but didn't think it was his business. A former volunteer firefighter said Garrett had mentioned the equipment discrepancies to him, but asked him not to say anything until he was sure. Everyone knew something. Nobody had the whole picture, and the silence was the glue. The trial was in September 2023. I'm not going to go through every day of it because most of it was procedural, but I'll tell you about one moment. The prosecution called Deb Holbrook. She took the stand and she was calm. She answered every question directly. She confirmed what Garrett had told her about the fund discrepancies. She confirmed the date, late September 2021. She confirmed that Garrett had planned to go back to the municipal building to photograph the purchase orders. The defense attorney asked her if Garrett had a history of going off on his own without telling people what he was doing. Deb looked at him and said, "He was a volunteer firefighter. He ran into burning buildings for free. He didn't need permission." That's who she was. That's who Garrett married. Roland Pruitt was convicted on all counts in October 2023. Second-degree murder, arson, embezzlement, obstruction, evidence tampering. He was sentenced to 38 to 52 years at the Wyoming State Penitentiary in Rawlins. He'll be eligible for parole in 2051. He'll be 79 years old. Lyle Gunderson pled guilty to forgery and obstruction in a separate proceeding. He received 4 years. He's serving his time at a minimum security facility in Torrington. The Emergency Services Fund was reconstituted with new oversight procedures. A 3-person committee with independent audit requirements. Beth Kearney chairs it. Bridger Basin Mechanical was dissolved. The other 2 shell companies were dissolved. Asset recovery proceedings are ongoing, but the forensic accountant told the court that approximately $287,000 of the $341,000 is likely unrecoverable. It was spent. After the sentencing, I walked out of the courthouse and the sun was out and the wind was blowing, and I just stood there on the steps for a while. The same steps where they'd arrested Pruitt 5 months earlier. I didn't feel what I expected to feel. I thought I'd feel victorious, satisfied. I felt tired. I felt like I'd been carrying something for 2 years that was finally on the ground, and I didn't know how to stand up straight without it. My uncle came up beside me. He didn't say anything. He just stood there with me. After a minute, he said, "You want to get some lunch?" I said, "Yeah, I did. It's been a while now. Almost 2 years since the trial. I still live in Powell. Some people think that's strange. They ask me why I'd stay in a town that treated me the way it did. I don't have a great answer for that. Powell's where I live. It's where Garrett lived. It's where I know the roads and the rivers and which diner has the best coffee. Leaving would have felt like Pruitt won something, and he didn't win anything." My plumbing business came back. Slowly at first, a few residential calls, then a school job, then the rec center contract again. The new town administrator called me personally for that one. She said, "We want to make this right." I appreciated that. I told her clean work is how I make everything right, and that's what they'd get. Deb sold the house on South Bent Street last spring. She and her daughter moved to Sheridan to be closer to Deb's parents. Before she left, she came over and gave me a picture. It was from a 4th of July barbecue in 2019. Me and Garrett standing in his backyard, both holding hot dogs, both squinting in the sun. I didn't even remember it being taken. I put it on my fridge. It's still there. Cora Niemeyer retired from the clerk's office. She moved to Thermopolis. I don't blame her. I think staying in Powell would have eaten her alive. Some people carry guilt differently. She needed distance. I hope she found some peace. The memorial bench outside the fire station is still there. The plaque still says, "He ran toward the fire," but now there's a second line underneath it. The town added it after the trial. It says, "The truth ran with him." I drive past it every morning on my way to work. I don't stop anymore. I did for a while, but now I just slow down a little and keep going. That feels right to me. If you've made it this far, and I mean really stayed with me through the whole thing, I want to say something. This wasn't easy to talk about. Not because of the facts. I've told the facts 100 times now in depositions and courtrooms and interviews. The facts are simple. A man stole money. Another man found out. The first man killed the second man and burned the evidence. A plumber with a carbon copy form figured it out. That part's easy. The hard part was the 19 months in between. The months where I doubted myself, where I lost work, where people I'd known for years stopped talking to me, where the mayor of my town came to my porch and told me grief was making me see things. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever been the person nobody believed until the proof was undeniable, hit subscribe. Not for me. For the next person sitting in a garage at midnight going through boxes because they know something doesn't add up and they refuse to let it go. Hit like so this story reaches them. And if you've got a story of your own, a time you found the truth and nobody wanted to hear it, tell me in the comments. I read every single one. There's more coming on this channel. Stories from people like me, people like Garrett, people like Cora, people like Deb. Ordinary people who ended up in extraordinary situations because someone with power decided that the truth was inconvenient. Check the next video when you're ready. I'm Nolan Johnston. I'm a plumber from Powell, Wyoming. I fixed pipes my whole life. Turns out the hardest thing I ever fixed was a story. I made coffee this morning, sat on my porch, watched the sun come up over the Absarokas. The truck was already loaded for a job out near Ralston. I finished the cup, locked the front door with my own key, and drove to work with the windows down.